Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Is the US meddling in Indian elections? Russia says it is. Indian leaders, including the Prime Minister, have also warned of foreign meddling. It has become a common refrain internationally as well. Countries accuse adversaries of meddling. But how serious is the issue in India and will it be investigated? We'll discuss. Meanwhile, India's Navy is expanding its presence and changing its tactics with deployments in the South China Sea and participation in a US-led naval alliance. In Russia, Victory Day celebrations as they intensify attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. In New Delhi, a masterclass for the Maldivian Foreign Minister by India's S. Jaishankar. A new world record with over $100 billion sent to India in remittances. The country's top medical body recommends the ideal diet, but Indian food products are under global scrutiny for contamination. Why is the food regulator failing us? Why Belgium is making headlines for offering insurance and pension to sex workers. Why West Asian powers are wooing Pakistan with high-level visits and investments. Why North Macedonia's election result is another blow to the European Union. And what is the man versus bear debate that has left the internet divided? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Chinese President Xi Jinping visits Hungary. Budapest is Beijing's closest European Union ally. In recent years, Hungary has attracted a flood of Chinese projects. This is President Xi's first visit to Europe since 2019. Hungary is the last leg of his tour. Israel says US President Joe Biden's threat to stop arms is very disappointing. Washington has warned that it will halt weapon supplies to Israel if it attacks Rafah, but Israel continues to expand its military operation in the southern Gaza city. United Nations says around 80,000 people have fled Rafah in the last 3 days. The London and Frankfurt stock exchanges hit record highs. This comes after the Bank of England keeps its interest rate at a 16-year high. The bank hinted at a cut in the coming months as inflation cools in the UK. On Wednesday, Sweden's central bank reduced borrowing costs for the first time in 8 years. Kenyan government inks a deal to end the strike by doctors. The strike over pay had started almost 2 months ago. It left thousands of patients struggling to find medical care. Under the deal, doctors will receive around $26 million in arrears over 5 years. Romania opens its first crowd-funded hospital. More than 300,000 people and nearly 8,000 companies contributed towards the Children's Cancer Hospital. Romania's spending on public health is among the lowest in the European Union. And Miss Teen USA resigns just days after Miss USA relinquished her crown. 17-year-old Uma Sofia Srivastav cites personal reasons for her decision. Earlier this week, Miss USA had resigned to prioritize her mental health. Indian elections have seen many issues: inflation, jobs, reforms, wars. We've seen it all. But this time, there's a new one. The issue of foreign interference. Could foreign agents or powers be meddling in India's election? A lot of people think so, and that includes the Prime Minister of India, but we'll get to that later. First, let's look at a key Indian partner, Russia. Their spokesperson was asked about the Khalistan plot, about American claims that Indian officials tried to kill a Khalistani separatist. Listen to the response.
According to our information, so far Washington has not given so far any credible information or evidence that Indian citizens are involved in the preparation of killing of some Panoon. The reason is that they try to unbalance the domestic political situation in India in order to make it harder to have the general parliamentary election, and that is part of the meddling into India's domestic affairs.
Russia says, where is the evidence? They also think the US is trying to meddle in India's elections. Now, just to be clear, Russia has its own agenda here to drive a wedge between India and the US. Plus, we are talking about Russia. a country that has a history of foreign meddling. So the source is a bit shady, but the allegation may be worth looking at. Recently, top Indian officials have hinted at the same. Even Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked about it. Let me quote from what he said. And this is the Indian Prime Minister. I can see there is an attempt by some in the world to influence our elections. They are not just giving their opinions, but are trying to influence our polls, but they will not be successful. Now, that is pretty direct. The Indian Prime Minister says there is an attempt to meddle. He may not have taken names, but his foreign minister did. That's Dr. S. Jaishankar. He put the blame on Western media.
Yes, I get a lot of these noises from the Western press. And if they criticize our democracy, it's not because they lack information. It is because they think they're also political players in our election. That is the reason.
These are unprecedented allegations. But where are they coming from? Is there any evidence of this meddling? Officially, no. We've only seen statements from the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, but we can guess what they're talking about. First is the Western news coverage. It's mostly critical of Prime Minister Modi. Look at this article in the New York Times. It accuses him of vilifying India's Muslims. Or look at this Bloomberg report. It says there is speculation that the BJP may win fewer seats than expected. Apparently, that's why markets are volatile. Reuters said something similar, that low voter turnout and apathy are worries for Modi. Clearly, the government has seen all of this and they do not like it. Secondly, we have seen official Western statements and reports. Think back to when Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal was arrested. The US released a statement. So did the German Foreign Ministry. Again, this was a key election issue. Kejriwal is a major opposition leader in India. His party is in power in 2 states. He has access to Indian courts and top lawyers. So why did Western nations comment? It was totally unwarranted. Another example is Canada. They accused India of killing a Khalistani separatist. The claim was made back in September last year, but the arrests came last week, right in the middle of India's elections. New Delhi has rejected these charges. It says no evidence has been shared yet.
Shared with us. So let me first make it clear that no specific or relevant evidence or information has been shared by the Canadian authorities in regard to this particular matter till date with us. You will therefore understand our view that the matter is being prejudged when people say X or Y. Obviously, there are political interests at work.
Is this what Indian officials are talking about? The negative press and statements? I'm afraid we can't be sure. Having said that, there are 2 factors to note here. One, Western media doubting Indian democracy is not new. It's as old as India's democracy. This is what the Washington Post wrote way back in 1952. Let me quote. Harried officials trying to put 170 million voters through the pages of democracy find that self-government takes a lot of teaching in this land of high illiteracy and low diet. The New York Times also covered this. They talked about problems with an illiterate population. And this was not surprising. Most people in the West did not expect Indian democracy to succeed. They underestimated the Indian voter, and 7 decades later, they still do. Look at this article, again in the Western press. I'm quoting, "The right to vote is held as sacred, but polling also indicates that large numbers of Indians are willing to cede civil liberties to support a powerful ruler they see as getting things done." The same attitude, as if the Indian voter does not care about democracy or civil rights. So my point is quite simple. The Western press has a history of doing this, of criticizing Indian democracy. Whether it qualifies as intervention is a different question altogether, which brings us to the second factor, the global trend. Many countries have complained of foreign meddling. The US has accused Russia and China, Canada has accused India and China, and Europe accused Russia. So interference is not unimaginable. It's also not beyond the West. But that is also why clarity is important. All these countries have ordered investigations into foreign meddling. Some are still underway, others have been closed. In Canada, for example, India got a clean chit. Perhaps New Delhi should do the same. Go public with the facts and investigate them. Because these are serious allegations. If left unaddressed, they could fester. India's strategic autonomy is one of its biggest strengths. It allows New Delhi to engage with diverse partners from Russia to the West. We work with all of them, and here's the latest example of that. Take a look at this picture. It is from April. These are Indian Navy commandos. They're called MARCOs, that is short for Marine Commandos. Last month, they completed a major operation. The operation was called Crimson Barracuda. It was a major drug bust. Indian commandos seized 940 kilograms of narcotics. The mission was a success, and Indian troops weren't the only ones involved. They were working with an international coalition called the Combined Maritime Forces, or CMF, Combined Maritime Forces. Navies from 43 countries are part of the CMF. This coalition protects 3.2 million square miles of international waters. This includes key regions from the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and some parts of the Indian Ocean too. This CMF, this combined force, is commanded by the US, and the alliance is based out of Bahrain. So why is India's participation news? Because usually India shies away from military alliances, but last year we saw a shift. In November 2023, India joined the CMF, and this is different from traditional military alliances like NATO, where an attack on one member triggers a response from the entire alliance. That's what NATO does. The CMF is more flexible. There are no political or military mandates. The members decide how much they want to get involved. Now, India is actively engaging with them, keeping two goals in mind. The first one is the safety and security of sea lanes, and this is critical for India. Look at these numbers. 83% of India's crude and 95% of trade comes through the sea. The Indian economy depends on sea lanes, so India must secure them, deploy its navy to boost deterrence against security threats like piracy and terrorism. That's the first goal. The second goal is countering China. In the last decade, the Chinese navy has significantly expanded in size, also in presence. Today, China has over 100 warships and submarines capable of operating in the Indian Ocean. And this poses a direct challenge to India. There is increased surveillance of these waters. Experts say China's presence in the Indian Ocean is only increasing. At any given time, there are at least 3 Chinese vessels in this region. Throughout the year, around 12 to 15 ships are deployed by China. And recent events are proof. Last month, China deployed 3 vessels to the Indian Ocean. Beijing said they were research vessels, research ships, but everyone knows that these vessels are used for intelligence gathering. These are spy ships. So India cannot afford to fall behind. It needs to respond. A strategic shift in the Navy's approach is imperative. Collaborating with allies helps India to enhance deterrence and to fill gaps. You see, the Chinese Navy is the largest in the world. It has 370 ships and submarines in all, 370. What about India? From 2014 to 2024, India added only 4 surface combatants. The fleet has increased from 25 to 29, and while India is taking steps to ramp up its arsenal, substantial upgrades will take time. In the interim, working with allies gives India more flexibility. It can have more targeted deployments and gain leverage over China in key flashpoints like the South China Sea. In fact, earlier this week, there was a significant development. India deployed 3 Indian warships in the South China Sea: a guided missile destroyer, a fleet tanker, and an anti-submarine corvette. These 3 vessels docked in Singapore. Indian naval officers met with their local counterparts. There was a statement from New Delhi. It said 2 critical issues were discussed here: the maritime security landscape in the region, and ways to deal with emerging threats. This is what they discussed. In recent months, the Indian Navy has set an example for the region with its proactive handling of the Red Sea crisis. By the month of March this year, the Indian Navy had conducted over a dozen operations and saved more than 100 lives. More engagements with like-minded allies will only bolster India's credentials as the net security provider in this region. It's Victory Day in Russia. Moscow marks it every year on May 9th. It celebrates Russia's victory over Nazi Germany. Now, Victory Day has a cult status in Moscow. Every year, there are military parades, patriotic pageantry, pomp, pride, and of course, a speech by Vladimir Putin.
Today we see attempts to distort the truth about World War II. It is inconvenient to those who are accustomed to building their essentially colonial policy on hypocrisy and lies. Russia will do everything to prevent a global conflict. But at the same time, we will not allow anyone to threaten us. Our strategic forces are always in combat readiness.
With these words, Putin flexed his military muscle, showcased his latest weapons, and shot off another warning to the West. The last time Russia fought European powers, it won. That's why Victory Day is celebrated, to mark their win in the Second World War. In 1941, troops from Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Entire cities were plundered. Some 27 million people lost their lives. Virtually every family in Russia was affected, including Putin's family. But the Soviet army, or the Red Army as they were called, pushed back. They drove the Nazis all the way back to Berlin. That's where the Nazis surrendered. It ended the Second World War in Europe. For Russia, the day is a powerful symbol of its military prowess, of its righteousness, of its national identity. And Putin has made it a pillar of his rule. Since 1999, he's ramped up the celebrations. He brought back displays of military might. Tanks and missiles now roll across the Red Square. Fighter jets fly overhead. Every year, he lays a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Accompanying him are veterans. This year's celebrations come as Putin begins his 5th term in power. He was joined by dignitaries, presidents of former Soviet nations, allies including leaders of Cuba, Guinea-Bissau, and Laos. So why is it such a big deal for Putin? Because it serves his core belief that Russia is great and invincible. Putin draws power from nostalgia. He wants to revive the clout of the erstwhile Soviet Union. And what better occasion than Victory Day? Take the Ukraine war, for example. When Russia invaded, Putin immediately drew parallels. He cited denazification of Ukraine as a primary goal. He said Ukrainian leaders had cooperated with the Nazis. He compared this war to the Great Patriotic War. And 800 days later, he continues to do that.
We celebrate Victory Day in the context of the special military operation. All its participants, those who are on the front line, on the line of combat contact, are our heroes. We bow to your perseverance, self-sacrifice, and dedication. All of Russia is with you.
So Putin is thanking Russian soldiers, and he does have a lot to thank them for. In the last few months, Russia has made several gains in the battlefield. They may be modest, but they're gains nonetheless. On Tuesday, Russia launched over 70 missiles and drones. They struck power stations and energy facilities in Ukraine. Kiev and 6 other cities were affected. 9 regions plunged into darkness. It was one of the biggest attacks in weeks. The aim was simple: to cut Ukraine off the power grid. So what explains this ramped-up offensive? Right now, for Moscow, time is of the essence. It is looking to occupy as much territory as possible before Ukraine receives Western aid. So Russia has mobilized more troops. It is fighting to capture more towns. For the last few weeks, it's been trying to capture Chasiv Yar, a strategic town in Donetsk. Moscow hoped it would fall by today, May 9th. That would make it a sweet Victory Day win for them. But the town is still standing. So Russia hopes to change that in the next few days. Ukraine, on the other hand, is on the defensive. It has run out of ammunition. Its soldiers are exhausted. Its front lines are faltering. Ukraine desperately needs the Western aid. So Moscow is trying to capitalize on that. As it marks the 79th Victory Day celebrations, Russia has its eyes set on another victory in Ukraine. Our next story is about the Maldives, India's one-time friendly island neighbor that has now switched camps. The Maldives is cozying up to China, thanks to their president, Mohammad Muizzu. Muizzu's entire political clout stems from one campaign: India out. He made it his mission to remove Indian troops from the Maldives, troops who were stationed there to help with search and rescue operations, soldiers who were operating helicopters and an aircraft that India had gifted to the Maldives. Muizu wanted them out, and he won the presidency with this speech. Later, he stormed to power in the parliament as well. So it seems quite clear that the Maldives has chosen China, and that is fine. It is a sovereign nation. It has the right to pick its allies. But perhaps they should be a bit more consistent. Because for all the loud India out rhetoric, they don't seem to be following through. Earlier this week, we told you about the tourism minister, how he implored Indians to keep visiting the Maldives. It seems the country can't pick a lane. It wants to shun India, but also reap the benefits of ties with New Delhi. The Maldives has sent their foreign minister to India, Musa Zamir. He seemed quite pleased when he landed in New Delhi yesterday. He said he wanted to strengthen ties and experience Indian culture. That's the opposite of his president's position. But Zamir was still trying to portray that everything is normal. Today, the Maldivian FM had a meeting with his Indian counterpart, Dr. S. Jaishankar. Now, Jaishankar is a seasoned diplomat, and he seems to have had enough of Mali's flip-flops. So today, he laid out India's position in no uncertain terms.
Excellency, India has been a key provider of development assistance to the Maldives. Our projects have benefited the lives of the people of your country. They've contributed directly to the quality of life. They range from infrastructure projects and social initiatives to medical evacuation and health facilities. We have also extended financial support on favorable terms in the past. India has been a first responder on numerous occasions for Maldives. Our cooperation has also enhanced the security and well-being of your country through shared activities, equipment provisioning, capacity building and training. Excellency, the world is today passing through a volatile and uncertain period. In such times as we saw during COVID, during natural disasters and economic difficulties, close partnerships with neighbors are of great value.
You saw what he did there. Jaishankar brought out the receipts. In less than a minute, he listed all the ways that India had been there for the Maldives. India has given the Maldives about $2 billion in aid. India has invested in infrastructure there, from hospitals to highways. India has extended loans on favorable terms. That's something to think about when partnering with China. Beijing also gives loans, but no one ever calls the terms favorable. Loan shark and debt trap are the common associations with Chinese loans. The Maldives owes India about $400 million. It owes China about $1.4 billion. So it is a precarious situation. All this explains the mixed Maldivian messaging. The country doesn't want to lose Indian investments or Indian tourists. The tourism money will go a long way in paying off Chinese loans. As Jaishankar said, the partnership with India is of great value to the Maldives. The Maldivian foreign minister acknowledged this. He expressed his appreciation for India's steadfast support. Hopefully, his president, Mohammad Muizu, also gets the message. Our next story is about a world record, a record set by Indians working overseas for the kind of money they sent home. More than $100 billion. That was the volume of remittances in 2022. And this is a world first. No other country has crossed the 100 billion mark. It's a big sum. It makes up over 3% of India's GDP. So what explains this surge? And how does it help the Indian economy? Our next report has the answers.
111 billion is a significant number. That's the value of the remittances sent by Indians working overseas in 2022. The sum surpasses the GDP of several countries like Guatemala, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, Panama, Sri Lanka and Myanmar, just to name a few. Crossing the $100 billion mark is a milestone, but this number tells a story too. Usually, the Gulf countries make up a large chunk of remittances in India. A large number of Indian workers travel to the region, usually to find work in construction and related sectors. In the last few years, these workers have fared well. A spike in energy prices and a boom in demand for migrant workers drove up the remittances from the Gulf. But there's a new trend that's picking up. It's being driven by Indians living in developed economies and working in high-skilled jobs. They now have a 36% share in India's remittances pie. Who are these Indians? A large chunk of them are the Indian techies working in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom and Singapore. The World Bank expects similar levels of contribution in 2024 as well. Several factors contribute to this trend. The first and the most obvious one is cultural. Indian workers overseas have a habit of sending some of their earnings back home each month. This is for the sustenance of their families. That's unlikely to change anytime soon. The second factor are the savings programs. Overseas Indians like to keep some of their money in India, and there's a good reason for that. These savings, usually in the form of fixed deposits in banks, deliver better interest rates than the West, and they are tax exempt. While the data about these deposits is hard to come by, according to one estimate, non-resident Indians or NRIs have around $143 billion worth of deposits in India. And this number is increasing by $10 billion annually. Sending money home is also getting cheaper thanks to India's digital payments platform. UPI, or the Unified Payments System, has been opened up for overseas payments too. UPI is a real-time money transfer system. Most recently, it was integrated with Singapore's PayNow. This has led to a boost in cross-border transactions. Sending money via UPI is cheaper than using banks, and Indians in Singapore are making the most of this. By November last year, this system was recording around 100 transactions a day and close to 3,000 in a month. The Indian government plans to expand UPI to more countries. Even without this system, Indians appear poised to surpass their own record, as the World Bank predicts that remittances to India will increase to $135 billion this year.
Now, what should Indians eat? Anything they want may be a popular answer, but it's not an ideal answer. Your diet has a major impact on your health. A good diet can keep you healthy, a bad one can make you sick. We already know that, but a new report also says this. And it has been published by India's top medical body, the ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research. They found that 56% diseases in India are linked to a bad diet, 56%. Maybe more processed food, or too much sugar, or not enough nutrients. Imagine that, more than half of all diseases due to food, which makes you wonder what exactly qualifies as a good diet. What should your plate look like? Here's what ICMR says. You should have 100 grams of fruits, 85 grams of pulses, egg and meat, 35 grams of nuts and seeds, 27 grams of fats and oil, 250 grams of cereals, 300 milliliters of milk or curd, and 400 grams of vegetables. I know we called it a plate, but this is not for just one meal, it is for the entire day. The ICMR says this diet will give you 2,000 calories. It is also pretty balanced in nutrients. And beyond this, the ICMR has given 17 guidelines. A few of them stand out, like using oils and fats in moderation, avoiding protein supplements, restricting salt intake, and minimizing sugar consumption. That last one may sound hard to do. How much sugar should you be consuming? The ICMR says 20 to 25 grams in a day. Now, to put that in context, 1 teaspoon of sugar is 5.7 grams. And a can of Coca-Cola has almost 32 grams. So one can will put you over the limit. The ICMR has also covered cooking methods and materials. They've settled some long-standing debates, for example, microwave ovens and air fryers. The report gives both of them a thumbs up. As for cooking material, the ICMR says earthen vessels are the safest. Your non-stick pans are safe too, but not beyond 170 degrees Celsius. And what about your favorite beverages? The report advises tea and coffee in moderation. It says caffeine should not exceed 300 grams per day. And how much is that? Around 3 cups. As for alcohol, it's a strict no, not even light drinking. But you know what caught our attention? The 17th guideline issued by ICMR. It says, read information on labels to make informed choices. It may sound like good advice, but is that information accurate? Based on recent developments, maybe not. Indian products are under the scanner in foreign markets, especially Indian spices. You may have heard of MDH and Everest. These are the biggest spice producers in India, but some of their products have been banned in Hong Kong and Singapore. Why? Because they had too much pesticide, and that too a cancer-causing one. Same in Europe. In the last 5 years, the EU flagged more than 400 Indian products. Apparently, they were highly contaminated, 400. Remember, we are talking about products that had passed Indian quality checks. Yet they were flagged. 21 products had cadmium, which increases the risk of kidney disease. 59 products had pesticides, again cancer-causing ones, and 100 products had salmonella. Now, the EU flagged these products, so presumably they did not enter the European market. But what about India? We are buying and consuming these products, these contaminated items, which makes you wonder, what is the regulator doing? In India, food regulation is done by the FSSAI, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. They function under the Ministry of Health. So the buck stops with them. How did these products pass their quality checks? Well, the problems are many. One is funding. The regulator's budget has actually been cut. In 2019, around 360 crore rupees was allocated for them. By 2022, the allocation came down to 300 crores. So money is a problem. You need funds to hire more food commissioners, to carry out more checks, and to be more vigilant. Now, 300 crores is around $35 million. Compare this to the US regulator. In America, the FDA looks after food and drugs. And what is their budget? More than $6.5 billion. They spent around $43 million on offices and labs alone. Now, we're not saying replicate that, but clearly $35 million is not enough. Not when the health of 1.4 billion people is at risk. The second problem is corruption. Just this week, Indian officials arrested an FSSAI assistant director. He was taking bribes from a private lab. Guess how much money they recovered from him? Around 1.8 crore rupees. These are two things the government can easily address. Increase the funding and step up vigilance. If not, these diet plans and export ambitions are pointless. Moving to Belgium, it has approved a new labour law for sex workers. It's the first country in the world to do so. This will give sex workers a lot of rights. They can have access to healthcare. They can terminate their contract anytime they want. They can refuse sexual acts. They will enjoy pension benefits. The law sets a precedent for other countries. In 78 nations across the globe, sex work is legal or partially legal. Yet when it comes to protections, there are none for these people. Can these nations take a leaf out of Belgium's book? Our next report tells you.
It's a first in the entire world. Belgium has approved new labour laws for sex workers. It gives these workers some new rights. They are entitled to health insurance, pensions, unemployment, family benefits, holidays and maternity leave. So, like any other job in the world. Not just that, sex workers can now refuse any client. They can refuse any sexual act. They can also interrupt a sexual act at any time without the fear of dismissal or punishment. Pimps must provide sex workers with an alarm button in the room. If they're not comfortable, they can press the button. Plus, they must ensure their safety. If the sex workers want to end their contract, they can do that without losing their right to unemployment benefits. The new law ensures anonymity for all these workers. That way, they can apply to any other job without fear of discrimination. In 2022, Belgium became the first country to decriminalize self-employed sex work. Now they've given them employment rights. The new law is a world first, and it sets a precedent. Because while prostitution is legal or partially legal in 78 countries across the globe, when it comes to protections, there are few. Legalizing prostitution was about making it safe. It was about giving workers access to healthcare or government services. Instead, it turned into a major industry, generating millions in taxes, but doing little for the workers. And this is the situation where it's legal. So imagine the situation in countries where it's not. But that doesn't mean sex work doesn't exist there. It just escapes legal scrutiny. And that means more discrimination for the workers. governments turn a blind eye to it. There's a lack of access to health and safety, and that leaves sex workers susceptible to violence and exploitation. This makes the Belgian government's move commendable, because no matter what governments do, sex work exists across the globe, and it will continue to exist in the future despite stereotypes and societal attitudes. At the end of the day, sex work is work, which means sex workers are entitled to labor rights just like any other worker. This includes the right to fair wages, safe working conditions, and protection from discrimination and harassment. With this new law, Belgium aims to protect these very rights of sex workers, regardless of the moral judgments that people may have.
Is West Asia wooing Pakistan? I know what you're thinking. What a strange country to pick. Pakistan can't manage its own affairs. Why would anyone want to court them? Maybe for that very reason. Let me explain. In recent weeks, Pakistan has seen a flurry of diplomatic visits. First, the Saudi foreign minister came. His job was to speed up investments. How much? Around $5 billion of it. It's part of a larger Saudi program. Riyadh is expected to invest $25 billion in total. Days later, the Iranian president came, Ibrahim Raisi. He visited multiple Pakistani cities. He held talks with the top leaders and promised to increase bilateral trade. Again, by how much? From 2 billion to 10 billion. After Raisi came another Saudi delegation. It had senior officials from 35 companies. They held meetings with leaders of Pakistan's business community, which brings us to present day. Qatar's foreign minister is in Islamabad. He met Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Again, the focus was on investments. Sharif urged Qatar to expand its Pakistani portfolio. Now, these are all important visits. But the biggest one has not happened yet. A visit by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It is expected between May 10th and May 15th, perhaps over the weekend or next week. Now, MBS is traveling to seal the deal. His officials have already identified the investments. He will merely sign the agreements. And all of this raises the same question. Why Pakistan? There are political and financial reasons. Politically, Pakistan is important for the West, for West Asia rather. It's a fellow Muslim country, not to mention the only Islamic nuclear power. Gulf states have often depended on Pakistan for security. Saudi Arabia is set to host Pakistani soldiers. Even Qatar has called on them. During the FIFA World Cup, Pakistan sent thousands of troops to Qatar. Other nations sent police officers. Pakistan sent soldiers. So West Asia will not let Pakistan fail. They cannot afford to. Those are the political reasons. Now we come to the financial reasons. Pakistan is really desperate for investments. So it's a good time to cash in, to get some lucrative deals. Last year, Pakistan set up a special investment council, the SIFC. And what does it do? Attract and approve foreign investments. And here's the main part. It has both civilian and military officials, meaning things get done very quickly. No red tape, no waiting around for approvals. Also, these new deals are not for loans. They are for investments. So Pakistan is looking to privatize a lot of state operations. The national carrier is up for sale. So are 3 airports. And because Pakistan is desperate, you can get a good deal. Maybe buy it for cheap. Same with their natural resources. Pakistan is handing out mining and refinery licenses. And Saudi Arabia is eyeing both. They're looking to buy some stake in a copper mine in western Pakistan. It's called Reko-Dik. Riyadh is also looking to build a refinery in Gwadar. It's expected to cost $14 billion. Now, these are safer bets than loans. You're getting an asset or resource for your money. It's not like a bailout. And all of this is happening very fast. The announcements, the investments, the takeovers, it's happening at a very fast pace. Some Pakistani experts are worried about it, like the CEO of Bank of Punjab. Let me quote. Pursuit in haste can do more damage than good, with the risk of oscillating towards creating a private sector monopoly in lieu of a public sector. In simple words, it can be counterproductive. Yes, Pakistan may dump the loss-making assets, but the Gulf companies may monopolize the economy. And how should India see all of this? Well, Pakistan is still a bet. But India is a proven partner. Plus, the relations have been largely dehyphenated. West Asia does not look at India through a Pakistani prism. Having said that, New Delhi should keep a close eye on what's happening there. Investments often lead to political support. If Gulf states sink tens of billions into Pakistan, they will want to protect their assets. And that could mean more support for the Pakistani army. Of course, all of this is incumbent on one major assumption, that Islamabad will change its ways, that it will actually reform its economy. So we'll be tracking this story very closely. Now let's turn to Europe, to the country of North Macedonia. This is a country in the Balkans, home to less than 2 million people. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation. And it has just voted against the European Union. Not directly, though. It wasn't some EU referendum. The people of North Macedonia just voted in internal elections. The country went to polls yesterday. Macedonians voted for a new president and parliament, and the results are out. They show the direction the country is headed in. Here are the winners.
I'm happy, even though I don't know what it means yet. I don't know what it feels like to be a president. But I do know that I'll do everything I can to defend the interests of the nation.
This is North Macedonia's new president-elect, the first woman to get elected to the post. But president is a ceremonial position in the country. Much like in India, the real power is held by the country's prime minister. In North Macedonia, it's likely to be this man.
Macedonia is free and Macedonia will be eternal. Everyone who thought they could ruin Macedonia, cause it harm and humiliation will be held responsible and end up in a landfill.
That's the leader of the winning party, Hristijan Mikoski. He might be the country's next prime minister. His victory speech was quite combative, and that is his style. Perhaps one of the reasons he got elected. And that's also the reason that his detractors are afraid of what will happen to North Macedonia's EU bid.
I expect nothing at all. Why? Because they will send us back. Instead of going forward toward the European Union, we will head back.
The country has been trying to get into the EU for decades. It became an EU candidate in 2005, but negotiations did not begin until 2022. And why is that? Because the country has had problems with its neighbors, existing EU members like Greece and Bulgaria. Both countries have vetoed North Macedonia's EU membership in the past. Let's look at the Greek issue first. Up until 2019, North Macedonia was called the Republic of Macedonia. Some of you may have heard that name, Macedonia. It was the homeland of a Greek legend, Alexander the Great. Macedonia was once a Greek kingdom. It gave birth to Alexander's transcontinental empire. Now the thing is, ancient Macedonia is not really related to North Macedonia. The Macedonians of today are not Greek. So Greece accused this country of using a misleading name and vetoed its EU membership. The naming dispute took decades to resolve. It only ended in 2019 with a name change. But North Macedonia's election-winning party wants to go back to the old name.
We saved ourselves. We are no longer North but Macedonia, loud and clear.
The issue of Bulgaria is again about names and recognition. The Macedonian and Bulgarian languages are related. They have common roots, but North Macedonia had refused to recognize this, so Bulgaria vetoed its EU membership. The issue is being resolved, but the new Macedonian government might resume hostilities with Bulgaria, which basically means a pause to an already slow process. But that is what North Macedonia voted for, so it seems most of the people there are now Eurosceptics. It's another division cropping up in Europe. It shows the waning power and promise of the EU. A few years ago, EU membership was coveted. Countries were willing to bury the hatchet to become members of the European Union. Century-old issues were swept under the carpet, all to join the exclusive EU club. But now the situation has changed. Joining the EU is not that appealing anymore. People are voting for Eurosceptics, even in member countries. Hungary's Viktor Orban, the Italian coalition led by Giorgia Meloni, they all promised to put their own country first ahead of the European Union. These are the leaders winning power, often at the expense of European unity. Does this mean the golden age of the EU is over? The next few European elections will be telling. Before we begin our last story tonight, I have a question for all the women watching this. Would you rather be alone in the woods with a man or a bear? Now, this is a hypothetical question, of course, part of an online trend, but it is tearing people apart on social media. It has snowballed into a cultural discussion worth getting your teeth into. Let me show you why.
Would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear?
Bear. Man is scary. With a bear.
What I've heard about bears, they don't always attack you, right?
Depends what man, but probably a bear.
Oh, 100% a bear, which is like terrifying to say, but
Definitely a bear. Some men are very scary out there.
a bear.
I would say a man.
7 out of 8 women answered bear with very little hesitation. Now, this video has gone viral. It has been viewed tens of millions of times and it has innumerable variants. This question is being asked across nations, among friends, strangers, partners, family members, and the answer is almost always the same. If they're alone in the woods, a good number of women would prefer a bear over a man around them. And this answer is not sitting well with many, but not in the way you would imagine. It has sparked anger online, especially among men. Some are calling the question misandrist. Some say it's an excuse to hate on men. Some are mansplaining the dangers of bears, and some are going back to basics and insulting women for their opinion. But a lot of critics are missing the point. Because newsflash, this question is not actually about a bear. It's about women even considering hypothetical man versus bear scenarios and then picking a wild animal. This shows the extent to which society has failed women.
This isn't about bears attacking women in the forest. This isn't about your National Geographic studies about bears because you watched a lot of it on TV. It's not your expertise on how bears act. It's about how men act towards women. It's about how women are being assaulted by men. It's how women would rather choose being with a bear than being tortured by a man and then being shamed and blamed for the attack afterwards and not even being believed.
Let me show you some numbers. According to global data from the United Nations, in 2022, 89,000 women and girls were killed intentionally. Every year, 38% of all murders of women are committed by their partners. 1 in every 3 women is subjected to violence by a partner. Such statistics are always chilling. They show us the scope of violence against women, but even they do little to capture the breadth of abuse women face, because these numbers do not include harassment, sexual or otherwise. But let me remind you, women are harassed at work, while running, while commuting, mostly in public, but also in private spheres. Women face threats, and that's not the only problem here. It is also about everything that happens before and after the abuse. Women say that with a bear, they know what the dangers are. If they were attacked by a bear, people would believe them. They wouldn't ask, what were you wearing? What were you drinking? Did you say no? We see this time and again with survivors of rape and abuse. Victim blaming is the modus operandi. People say women are being hysterical, oversensitive, humorless. Skeptics are everywhere, and they're willing to perform all kinds of mental acrobatics only to avoid facing the reality of living in our world as a woman. And this is not just a cultural issue. There are legal problems too. It is difficult to prove sexual crimes, and in many nations, certain assaults on women are not even considered criminal, like in the case of marital rape. But before you say hashtag not all men, let me tell you, this is not about men versus women. It goes beyond that. If an estimated 91% victims of rape are women and 99% of perpetrators are men, it is enough to make all women fearful. And this is not just common knowledge among women. Listen to young girls asking their fathers the same question. Should their daughter be alone with a man or a bear?
Pick. Would you rather have a bear or a man in the woods alone with your daughter?
I'd rather have the bear.
Would you rather me out in the woods alone by myself with a man or a bear?
I'd take the bear.
How come?
You'd have better chance with the bear because men are evil.
Girls are often told fairy tales about princesses venturing into the woods, where they're scared of a big, bad wolf or bear, but find comfort in a man, their Prince Charming. It is both ironic and sad that in the real world, they would rather choose a bear than a man. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Brazil, animals remain stranded on rooftops amid devastating floods. Japan starts hunting fin whales in a bid to scale up commercial whaling. And did you know that Lionel Messi's career at Barcelona started with a promise made on a napkin? That napkin contract is now up for auction. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1927, Canberra replaced Melbourne as Australia's capital. In the early 20th century, Australia was trying to decide on a location for its capital. Melbourne and Sydney were locked in a rivalry. To settle the debate, a compromise was reached to build a new city, and that city was Canberra. Once it was built, the capital shifted to Canberra. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost.